There are plenty of cases we have on record of the monks providing education to people in the local area. But let us say that that accusation is true. Let's even grant it for the sake of argument. Let's say that the monastery's contribution had simply been to teach other monks how to read and write. That's all it was. Well, even if that had been their only contribution, that would have been no small accomplishment. Because consider what happened in the Greek Dark Ages. Now, people have typically forgotten about this, but it's very important. From about 1100 to 800 BC, we had something called the Greek Dark Ages. And what happened here was that the Mycenaean Greeks had some kind of terrible disaster befall them. The nature of that disaster is still debated. But something terrible happened to these people. And when the smoke had cleared, for the next 300 years, we find that, in effect, the ancient Greeks, the Mycenaean Greeks, had lost literacy. They had lost the ability to read and write. Now you wonder, how could you lose the ability to read and write? How could you forget that? Well, partly it happened because people were scattered following whatever disaster it was that befell them. And they had to think solely of their own survival. And learning how to read and write was not exactly critical when you just needed food and sustenance. Secondly, it's been speculated that maybe whatever disaster struck the Mycenaean Greeks struck in particular the educated classes, so that those who would have remembered literacy were in fact wiped out. Well, whatever the explanation, the fact is they lost literacy at a time of general civilizational collapse. Well, let's remember that the monks were functioning and carrying out all these wonderful tasks I've described at a time in Western European history that was very similar. There was general collapse. There was political disorder. There was an abandonment of education by and large. There was an abandonment of urban life. That was the environment in which the monks functioned. And so, even if all they had done was to keep literacy alive, well, that's very important, because that means they prevented a repeat of the Greek Dark Ages, when literacy was lost. Thanks to the monasteries, literacy was not lost, but Western Europe managed to hang on to it. That's no small contribution, is it? In fact, the contributions of the monks have been so great that even scholars who are inclined to be unsympathetic to them have conceded it. And I've always tried to go out of my way, when I've written about Catholic history, to cite not only non-Catholics, but anti-Catholics when possible, so that people won't come back and say that I'm just picking and choosing among my sources. When people who don't even like the Catholic Church are saying, okay, the monks did a lot, that says something. So, for example, one unsympathetic scholar said, the monks not only established the schools and were the schoolmasters in them, but also laid the foundations for the universities. They were the thinkers and philosophers of the day and shaped the political and religious thought. To them, both collectively and individually, was due the continuity of thought and civilization of the ancient world with the later Middle Ages and with the modern period. That's no small compliment. A century ago, another historian said, it was the monks, and they alone, who carried to a successful issue the tremendous undertaking of mollifying the rampant invader, softening the rudeness of his manners and the harshness of his spirit, familiarizing him with the restraints of Christian morality, and bringing home to him with convincing power the necessity of observing the fundamental principles of law and order, instructing him in the use of arts and instruments of industry and social progress, in a word, of assimilating, civilizing, and Christianizing 20-odd barbarian tribes, many of which, by the way, were very impressed with the morality and the conviction of the monks. They were very moved by their witness. A Protestant historian says, had it not been for the monks and monasteries, the barbarian deluge might have swept away utterly the traces of Roman civilization. The monk was the pioneer of civilization and Christianity in England, Germany, Poland, Bohemia, Sweden, Denmark. With the incessant din of arms around him, it was the monk in his cloister, for instance on Mount Athos, who by preserving and transcribing ancient manuscripts, both Christian and pagan, as well as by recording his observations of contemporaneous events, was handing down the torch of knowledge unquenched to future generations and hoarding up stores of erudition for the researches of a more enlightened age. The first musicians, painters, farmers, statesmen in Europe after the downfall of imperial Rome, under the onslaught of the barbarians, were monks. Now, these are critics of the monks. You can only imagine what their friends have to say. These are their critics. Here is the monastic contribution. And you'll notice that in this brief overview, I've not even mentioned, or at least hardly so, the contributions they made to the literature of the Western world by preserving ancient classics and indeed the Bible itself through laborious copying. Because that is the one thing that's conceded to us. The monks did this. But what I wanted to show you is they did so much else in so many areas, one can hardly even believe it. Now, today we touched briefly on the subject of charity, because we saw the monks as great dispensers of charity. Guests are to be treated as if they were Christ himself. Well, that is a small part of the story of Catholic charity, which will occupy us next time. Catholic charity is one of these areas in which people will concede the Catholic Church has done wonderful things. But what I want to suggest to you is that even we Catholics don't realize just how great Catholic charity is. It's a far more extraordinary story than even we believe. So join me next time on the Catholic Church, Builder of Civilization. See you then.